Lavender has been described as the original Australian Lavender Menace. She's a 78-year-old crone, born in Western Queensland. She's lived in 4 states, cities and regions, and now is in the New South Wales far north coast. Her life is fueled by and filled with the big and little matters of women's lives, the passions and pains of feminism, living as a lesbian and with radical feminism as her guiding star, the theory, the practice and all. She is the founding mother of both Lesbian Network and the Journal of Australian Lesbian Feminist Studies, and for nearly 50 years she has worked in numerous lesbian and feminist political and community groups and organising for IWD, Reclaim the Night, always fanning the flames of feminist lesbian resistance to patriarchy. Welcome, Lavender.
Thank you, lesbians. Are we on?
Yep.
I'm going to kick off, and it's going to be a quick gallop, so watch the overheads and listen to the words. Right, well, there's a little bit of a mash-up for you, but let's get straight into lesbian rights, human rights. Let's just start with human rights, because it's a very important concept, and I'm sorry if it's going to sound like a tutorial, but it won't be. First, it is really important to understand human rights. Okay, they're inherent in all people, okay, everyone, regardless of race, sex, religion, ethnicity, abilities, and so on. So, and that does include, of course, lesbians. So, historically, you know, if you remember Magna Carta, you know, the underlings have started to get restless about the monarch and the governments. So we've progressed a long way since then. But today, governments and institutions are seen as the keepers, or perhaps the purveyors of human rights. So the other thing I want to say is, this is a very important concept. When we talk about equality, there's formal equality and there's substantive equality. Now, formal equality is the numbers. We'll have equal rights of men and equal numbers of men and women, 50%, right? It looks good, and a lot of people get sucked into that. But substantive equality is what we have to think about, because that takes into account the socio-political, socio-economic factors that make up for inequality. So instead of saying, oh, all women over 70 are equal, you need to think about what has happened in some lives. Has it been poverty? Has it been disability? Has it been from a non-English speaking background? These things have got significance. So please remember, substantive equality is very important. And now we're going to talk about the United Nations very briefly, because, as I said, human rights is the framework in which we talk about our lesbian rights. And the United Nations is supposed to guide the states. States being the United Nations talk for nations, by the way. We're not talking about Queensland, New South Wales. So there are some very significant ones. But we need to know about, for instance, the motherhood statement, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, by the way, Eleanor Roosevelt was one of those who worked for that in 1947. The Racial Discrimination Convention, the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Convention, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Hey, this is the one we need to think about. It's called CEDAW. And the Convention on the Rights of the Child. There are others, but that's just a starting point. So there are problems with universal United Nations human rights law. For instance, CEDAW and the Women's Department of UN Women that services the CEDAW arrangements internationally has gone soggy. So it's gender equality rather than sex. So I think we've heard about this before this weekend, haven't we? So the conflation of sexual orientation and gender identity. When I went to the UN to the Women's Commission in 2005, I think it was, yes, 10 years after 95, I've tried to find the sort of core group. This is amongst the unofficial delegates, I was representing Coalition of Activist Lesbians, as was Bronwyn Winter, who's not here, and another lesbian from Australia. I couldn't find any lesbian caucus anywhere, and eventually found one called Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. Sorry. And they didn't talk about lesbians at all. They were all rainbows. Right, okay. So I actually found I was more at home with the straight feminists who were from government organisations to talk about lesbian rights. So I educated quite a few of them right there on the spot, which was handy. People like, oh, it doesn't matter. Yeah, they're all names. So they're experts. The United Nations are experts in LGBTI. The lesbians don't get a look in. But I just want to say something that the UN is an absolute conglomerate of departments and so on, so people get lost. Here's a little bit of a tutorial for you. I think it summarises what we've talked about today and yesterday. The ways of looking at being a gender-critical feminist. So the realities of biological, of sex, that we reject, don't we? The legitimacy of gender roles. So I should have done a copy of that, a hard copy and left it at the door. But it is a nice little summary. You can put it on the end of these emails instead of pictures of your cat. Or dog.
Hang on.
Or your girlfriend. Right, human rights in Australia. Look, it's really important to know because once upon a time we thought human rights was about the starving people in Africa or what's happening in Asia. And then, yes, Aboriginal people have been treated disgustingly and we've had the Toomelah Commission and a whole lot of things. But, you know, human rights belong to us all. And as women and as lesbians, we've got to really see ourselves as part of it. So the Australian government's supposed to protect and promote and so on. And we've got a couple of significant pieces of legislation there, which you do need to know about. We have heard about the Sex Discrimination Act before today, and of course the Racial Discrimination Act preceded that. And the Australian Human Rights Commission Act is the sort of one that tells the Human Rights Commission what to do and what not to do by the omissions. And the Disability Discrimination Act, very important. The Age Discrimination Act was the last one of those. But you need to also note that there are protections through the common law, but that relies on someone taking a case through the courts or a tribunal to begin with. Well, the tribunals actually come through the human rights, whereas you could take a case in tort law or even criminal law to protect your lesbian rights, but it's expensive and tedious and individualistic and doesn't always hold for future. So the other thing I want to say about human rights in Australia is that all the states and territories have their own equal opportunity or anti-discrimination laws, whatever they're called, and these are important. Sometimes they go into quite a bit of detail, and we heard from things that Helen and Jean both addressed yesterday of various problems that have arisen. But if there is a conflict between state and federal, the federal predominates, and that's why we need to keep an eye on that as well. Now, there's also the problem about competing rights, and I think we're in it right now, in the vortex of it. So there should be no hierarchy of rights. Let's get that quite clear. I've written that down. But it is very important that there is no hierarchy of rights. So the whole issue of competing rights is a very, very tricky one. But don't let us give up. The complaints processes through both federal and state are often confusing and legalistic. But we should not let that put us off. And I mean, we also have to, and I'll talk about this a bit later, follow the procedures if we want to get somewhere. So at the moment, sexual harassment and violence against women are the ones that are most commonly complained about. There's a little topic for you to think about, I'm sure you know it. So the hot topics about lesbian rights, we're drilling right down now. Lesbian rights are women's rights with some added extras or aspects of women's rights. So, lesbian rights, we talk about lesbian rights, we aim to right the wrongs, the exclusions, the bad-mouthing, the hate speech, that kind of thing. So I'm going to just run through those 3 or 4 there. Our rights are based on the experiences that we have by the very fact that we are women. We need to think about that. It's not just lesbians together having a good time, having a conference, which is great. It's the very fact of who we are as women. So the right to association, well, I think the Lesbian Action Group are probably looking at that one too. Specifically, we know what we want, male free, and with our own kind of lesbians, born and raised female. The right to equal access, be it health, education, hiring venues, whatever, on the same basis as others. And the right to freedom of speech and expression, and this is also important because I'm sure there'll hardly be a woman in this room who hasn't at some stage been told to shut up or we don't want to hear that. And we don't even have to be wearing all the badges and the overalls. And of course, the right to freedom from violence and discrimination. So abuses of lesbian rights, you can list them all, but here's a sort of a schema about prejudicial, and by the way, I prefer to use the word lesbophobic. But when we're talking to other people, we maybe need to use the word homophobic, because you can't always educate them when you're lobbying. That's a point you need to remember. I say that from experience. So, reflecting negative stereotypes, the abusive, the hostile, and sometimes it's the lovely little snags who say abusive things like half under their breath. Oh, those lesbians are always saying that. We hear that a bit around the Northern Rivers, I think, don't we, from those lovely New Age guys? Oh dear. But outright discrimination, judgmental, like, oh God, the lesbians are still on about Reclaim the Night, are they? Oh yeah, once when I was allowed to be the first speaker at Reclaim the Night, hold on, women, so why are the lesbians speaking first? There's only one lesbian, I don't know whether I thought I had a multiple personality or not. So, and of course violence and threats of violence, and that is much more common than we like to think against lesbians. So the dilemmas when we're working for lesbian rights. Well, we know there's many LGBTI people and others who have a very different focus. Well, remember with the lobbying for marriage equality, which they wanted to call same-sex marriage, there was this like, oh, a spouse in the house and the kids in the four-wheel drive, yeah. No. Legal equality, that's what it was about. Bugger the house. Might live in the land anyhow. So, progressives also, it's the same story. The gender identity thing is taking over. So and this is where we have to actually be aware, I'm sure we are, but be aware of how we can address it. So, and lastly, again, I'm going to say substantive equality is really what we're talking about. So the old Australian theme about a fair go, it's really important, and it's a very good approach to use to people. Even if they yell at you at the traffic lights, bloody lesbies, I go, oh, fair go, mate. Now we're really drilling down to promoting lesbian rights. Yeah, we need to promote it, not just protect, we've got to promote lesbian rights. And we want our allies of lesbians and even queer lesbians and lesbian and women who don't identify as lesbians. So we want to make sure that lesbians are in the driver's seat, but also have been consulted and respected, and especially lesbian feminist organisations. And please use reliable lesbian resources, not just what you find on the web that's full of queer and stuff. Go and ask Denise or Bronwyn or Cole.
Have a look at the Cole website.
That's right. You can give it a promo later. So try to understand and extend your understanding of heterosexism, lesbophobia, and particularly lesbians. Avoid presuming that we do know it all, because sometimes we don't. It's true. And also, look, when they stand up and say they speak for lesbians, the LGBTIs, etc., we can say, excuse me, but you do not speak for me. Just do it. Politely usually gets through more than I am. Right, so supporting lesbian human rights doesn't depend on your sexual orientation. As we said, lesbian rights are women's rights. And silence oppressors. We must remember that. So that's right. Keep calm and assert. Right, feminists asserting lesbian human rights. Well, as I said before, we need to extend and develop, or strengthen and develop our sex-based rights feminist analysis. Not just because we're here, but the reasons, and we've heard some very good explanations already. So, a bit of repetition here, isn't it?
3 minutes, right?
3 minutes. Okay, skipping along. It's also important to understand things and to extend into intergenerational discussions. And thank you for all the women under 60 who are here. I really appreciate it. I say that to extend. And we need to reclaim women's business, don't we? All right, feminists asserting lesbian rights again. We're getting on there. Best practice in services and so on doesn't depend on having an in-house lesbian. You hear it say, oh, our women's health centre's fine. They've got a lesbian there who works there. No, it's a responsibility of the management, the policy makers. Do not put it onto the one lesbian, in-house lesbian. And if you are that one, tell them so. So, lesbians have more in common with all women than we do with gay men. Please remember that and tell people that. Tell them. When you say, they don't speak for me, you can say that. Very important. Okay. Oh yes, I use the term lesbian women. It kind of underscores things there. So I will suggest that one. And for those women who are kind of on the side, but they say, oh, I'm not political, because they've seen some of us who are here out there with the banners and the t-shirts, and they don't kind of want to do that. So we go gently on them and ask them, and then respond rather than tell them. Very important, very important. And, you know, don't be afraid, because from the difficult moments, there comes great benefits. In a nutshell, see it, say it, stop it. We've got 1 minute?
41 seconds.
41 seconds.
38.
I'm starting with the political as personal. So what attitudes do you think need changing on various bases? We need to think about those. We can't do it now, maybe in the group later. But I just want to throw that out. And then, of course, we must be down to 10 seconds. The personal is political. What actions will you take for positive changes? Think locally, neighbours. My straight neighbour made these PowerPoints for me. Good on her. She learned something. I knew she was on side, sort of. Locally, regionally, you know, I go on these panels of people to give advice for health and stuff. And I always tell them I'm a lesbian, that's why I'm there. Nationally, internationally, we need to do those things. And I'm sure most of us are doing them.